Good evening. Allied leaders have just met to address the gravest threat to Euro-Atlantic security in decades. I invited NATO's close partners, Finland, Sweden and the European Union, to our summit because this crisis affects us all. Russia has shattered peace in Europe. The people of Ukraine are fighting for their freedom in the face of Russia's unprovoked invasion. We deplore the tragic loss of life, enormous human suffering and destruction. Our thoughts are with those killed, injured and displaced. We call on Russia to stop this senseless war. Immediately cease its assaults, withdraw all its forces from Ukraine, and turn back to the path of dialogue and turn away from aggression. The Kremlin's objectives are not limited to Ukraine. Russia has demanded legally binding agreements to renounce further NATO enlargement and to remove troops and infrastructure from allies that joined after 1997. We are facing a new normal in European security, where Russia openly contests the European security order and uses force to pursue its objectives. The world will hold Russia and Belarus accountable for their actions. Russia as the aggressor, Belarus as the enabler. President Putin's decision to pursue his aggression against Ukraine is a terrible strategic mistake, for which Russia will pay a severe price for years to come. NATO allies and the European Union have already introduced significant sanctions, and many of our partners around the globe have joined us. We must stand ready to do more, even if it means we have to pay a price, because we are in this for the long haul. At the same time, the Russian people must know that Kremlin's war on Ukraine will not make Russia more secure. It will not make Russia more respected in the world. It will not lead to a better future for your children. In response to Russia's massive military build-up over the past months, we have already strengthened our deterrence and defense. Yesterday, NATO allies activated our defense plans. And as a result, we are deploying elements of the NATO response force on land, at sea and in the air, to further strengthen our posture and to respond quickly to any contingency. The United States, Canada and European allies have deployed thousands of more troops to the eastern part of the alliance. We have over 100 jets at high alert operating in over 30 different locations, and over 120 ships from the high north to the Mediterranean, including 3 strike carrier groups. There must be no space for miscalculation or misunderstanding. We will do what it takes to protect and defend every ally and every inch of NATO territory. Leaders today also made clear that we must continue our support to Ukraine. The Kremlin is trying to make NATO and the EU provide less support to our partners. So our collective answer must be more support to countries like Georgia, Moldova, and Bosnia-Herzegovina, to help them succeed with their democratic reforms and pursue the path that they have freely chosen. More than ever, this crisis demonstrates the importance of North America and Europe standing together in NATO. There is no security in Europe without a strong transatlantic bond. With that, I'm ready to take your questions.
Okay, we'll go to Al Jazeera.
James Bayes, Al Jazeera. How fearful are you about the possible fall of Kyiv? How long, in your estimation, can the government of Ukraine last? And if we move to a resistance insurgency type situation, what support can NATO then give?
So what we see now is a full-fledged invasion of Ukraine from multiple directions with air, sea and land capabilities. And this is actually in line with what our intelligence services predicted over a long period of time, because we saw the build-up around Ukraine with air, sea and land forces. We see, of course, that they're moving towards Kiev. We also see the rhetoric, the messages, which is strongly indicating that the aim is to change government, to change and remove the democratically elected government in Kiev. We are in close contact with the government of Ukraine. We are, of course, monitoring the situation very closely. It is still a fluid situation. What we have seen is that the Ukrainian forces are fighting bravely and are actually able to inflict damage on the invading Russian forces. But again, it is a very fluid and an evolving situation. NATO allies expressed at the summit today that they provide support to Ukraine. They are ready to continue to provide support to Ukraine, military support, financial support, humanitarian support. And then I think we all have to judge how things evolve. But the message from NATO leaders and also from Finland and Sweden, EU, is that we are there to support Ukraine. We have supported Ukraine for many years and we continue to provide support.
We'll go to the National Press Agency of Ukraine.
Dmitry Shkurko, National News Agency of Ukraine. Secretary General, in the current situation which we observe now in Ukraine, does NATO preserve its desire to assist Ukraine with defensive equipment? In particular, can we expect that NATO will provide Ukraine with so badly needed anti-aircraft equipment? Thank you so much.
So NATO allies continue to provide support to Ukraine, and it was actually at the meeting today at the NATO summit with EU and Finland and Sweden, allies announced and also informed other allies about the type of weapons, the type of support, and some of that also includes air defense systems. So NATO allies have and continue to provide support, military, but also different types of equipment to Ukraine. Then we all realize that, of course, in this very evolving and difficult situation, it's hard to predict what will be the what are the possibilities in the future. But allies are providing support and are very committed to continue to provide support.
Okay, we'll go to NBC, just behind the cameras.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. There's concern that NATO could get pulled into this conflict if Russia were to shut down electricity or other services in Ukraine that could spill over into Poland or Romania. Can you say explicitly whether a Russian cyber attack of that nature would trigger an Article 5 collective defense?
So we are sending a very clear message to Russia that we provide support to our partner Ukraine, and allies provide many different types of support. NATO help Ukraine also with their cyber defenses. But then for NATO allies, we provide the absolute security guarantees under the Washington Treaty, Article 5. An attack on one will be regarded as an attack on all. And we are clear on this distinction because it is important to make sure that we don't have an even bigger crisis in Europe, where Russia challenge or is threatening or attacking any NATO allied country. And that's the reason why we so clearly send a message that we are there to protect all allies and every inch of NATO territory. When it comes to cyber attacks and the risk for incidents and accidents, for instance in the Black Sea, we are pursuing mechanisms of deconfliction to prevent that from happening. We have, as NATO allies, especially the United States, have done that, for instance, in Syria over a long period of time. And we, of course, are very focused. I spoke with Sarkar, the NATO Supreme Commander, on that issue recently. And he is very focused on the need to deconflict, to make sure that we don't have incidents or accidents that can spiral and get out of control and create a very dangerous situation. On cyber, well, we have stated that cyber attacks can trigger Article 5, but we have never gone into the position where we give a potential adversary the privilege of defining exactly when we trigger Article 5. We are focused on strengthening our cyber defenses. We are very much aware of that that's a risk, and therefore we are stepping up both the protection of our cyber networks, but also providing support to Ukraine, and we are very focused on the need for deconfliction.
Okay, we'll go to NPR Deutsche Welle. Just
Thank you. Terry Schultz with NPR and DW. I want to know more about the deployment of the NRF forces, please. How many will be sent where, from where? How long will it take to get there? Thinking about military mobility, as always. And also, what has changed in your calculation about the threat to NATO territory that has led allies to make the decision to deploy this for the first time in history for the purposes of collective defense? Thank you.
Well, what has changed over the last days is, of course, that there's a full-fledged invasion of a partner, a country that borders several NATO allied countries. And this is the most serious security crisis we have faced in Europe for decades. And therefore, we have the High Readiness Force, we have the NATO Response Force, and that's the reason why we are deploying it, to, again, prevent any miscalculation, any misunderstanding that we are not ready to protect and defend all allies. And of course, this is something all allies have agreed to do. 30 allies agreed. But of course, especially those in the eastern part of the alliance are extremely concerned. They are close to this, the fighting in Ukraine, and they also border Russia, and they have seen not only the military build-up and the ongoing war in Ukraine, but also seen the very threatening rhetoric. Because this goes far beyond Ukraine. This is about how Russia is actually challenging, contesting core values for our security, and demanding that NATO should withdraw all forces and infrastructure from almost half of our members. And they have stated that if we don't do that, if we don't meet their demands, there will be what they call military technical consequences. So we have to take this seriously, and that's exactly why we are now deploying the NATO Response Force for the first time in a collective defense context. And we speak about thousands of troops. We speak about air and maritime capabilities. They are already actually part of the standing naval groups. We have many planes operating in the eastern part of the alliance, and then several allies have partly already assigned troops and forces to the NATO Response Force. We have the lead elements, which are led by France. We have the United States, which has assigned thousands of troops to the NATO response force, and these will be deployed to different places in the eastern part of the alliance. Well, they are partly coming from the United States, but these are also very much European troops. For instance, the lead element, the VJTF, the High Readiness Joint Task Force, is now led by France. There's a strong German component there, and other allies also part of that.
Associated Press.
Lorne Cook, Associated Press. Just to follow up on that, Secretary General, the VJTF can only go to one place, and you have 8 allies that are extremely nervous. I mean, where might you send it? Have you identified a particular weakness on that eastern flank? Thank you.
But I think we have to understand that we have many elements, components of the NATO response force. We have increased the readiness of the NATO response force, and then I don't speak only about the lead element or the VJTF, the Very High Readiness Joint Task Force, but we speak about more elements than just that one. Second, we have allies, the United States, but also the United Kingdom and other allies that have increased readiness of forces that are assigned to NATO and the NATO response force. So, of course, these are additional forces that we can deploy as part of the broader deployment of the NATO response force. I'm not saying that we are deploying the whole force. The size of the NATO response force has been tripled since 2014 to roughly 40,000 troops. I'm not saying we are deploying the whole thing. I'm saying that we are deploying elements of the lead, also the VJTF, and elements of the rest of the NATO response force. And then it is for SACEUR to make fine decisions exactly on where the different elements are deployed. But we activated the defense plans yesterday, and now the elements of this force will be deployed, or is being deployed.
Okay, we'll go to TV2. Lady in white. Lady in white over there.
Thanks, Elin Sørsdal, TV2 Norway. I'll just follow up on AP and what Terry from NPR said. How quick can these troops and this force be deployed?
But some of these forces are already operating because we have sea and air forces, which are also already part of the NATO maritime forces operating from the Barents Sea down to the Mediterranean. Some are air forces, the air component of the NATO response force. And then some of the land forces also can move within a few days because they are part of either the lead element, which has already high readiness, or the other elements that has been put on high readiness. So we speak about days, and some are already operating because we have increased our presence already.
Okay, we'll try to take a couple of questions online. We'll go first to Frankfurt Allgemeine Zeitung, Thomas Kutschka.
Thanks a lot. Good afternoon. Secretary General, in the statement that has just been released, it is said that Russia's actions are flagrant rejection of the principles enshrined in the NATO-Russia Founding Act. And then it continues, it is Russia that has walked away from its commitments under the Act. Does that mean that NATO now considers the NATO-Russia Founding Act as obsolete, or do NATO member states are they still bound, do they still feel bound by this document? Thanks a lot.
NATO leaders decided today a statement where we clearly state the fact that Russia has walked away. The NATO-Russia Founding Act is based on some core principles enshrined in the Founding Act, and that is the respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty of all countries, including, of course, Ukraine. And this has been violated not once but twice, and actually been constantly violated since 2014 with the illegal annexation of Crimea and the continued presence of Russian forces and Russian-backed separatists in eastern Ukrainian Donbass. And this is further violated with the full-fledged invasion of Ukraine that we have seen over the last couple of days. So what we see is that Russia shows no respect for the NATO-Russia Founding Act. And of course, if you have a founding act between two partners, NATO and Russia, and one part doesn't respect that agreement, the agreement doesn't work. It doesn't function. It doesn't help us to improve our relationship with Russia. Because even if the founding act has good provisions and good intentions, if these intentions and the provisions and the founding act is not respected, it doesn't work. So that's the reality. The NATO-Russia Founding Act doesn't work because one side, Russia, has violated it over many years, but now we see an extremely blatant and flagrant violation of the Founding Act with the invasion of Ukraine.
We'll take the next question online also from Greg Palkett from Fox.
Thank you, Juana. Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. Two quick questions, one about war, one about peace. Do you agree with some reports of intelligence officials that Kiev could fall within the next, say, day or two? And despite the bravery of the fighting that you have cited among Ukrainian soldiers, do you see a defeat inevitable if war goes on? And the quick question about peace, there is discussion, President Zelensky offering to discuss with Russia an approach to peace that might include neutrality for Ukraine. Would you agree to something like that? Thank you.
The first on the situation on the ground. It is a full invasion of Ukraine. They are moving towards Kiev, and the stated goal is to change the government of Ukraine. It is a very unpredictable situation. Therefore, I will not speculate, but I will pay my respect to the Ukrainian armed forces, which are really proving their bravery and their courage by fighting and standing up against the much larger invading Russian force. On potential talks between the government of Ukraine, President Zelensky, and Russia, my main message is that this is for President Zelensky and the government of Ukraine to decide. What we need to see now is that Russia stop the attack against Ukraine, that they withdraw their forces and cease all the attacks on Ukraine. That's the easiest, the fastest, and the best way to peace. So if they want peace, then it's just stop to attack Ukraine. And therefore we call on Russia to do exactly that.
Okay, we'll go to NTV.
Yes, Sonomot from NTV. Secretary General, two short questions. First, you're a statistician, and so far with regard to risk, you have already evaluated the risk and the threat against NATO coming from Russia. Particularly, you foresee the playbook of Russia. And so my first question is, what is the risk that this conflict spread where, and what might be the end goal of Russia? And my second question is, you have at the tip of your fingers the security of 1 billion citizens in the transatlantic area. So you met with on VTC all the leaders. Can you reassure the public opinion that if there is a genuine threat coming from, because the rhetoric, the aggressive rhetoric of Russia, its behavior is unacceptable, that all member states are committed to defend and protect every single centimeter of NATO? Thank you.
In the meeting today with NATO leaders, it was a very strong message of unity, a very strong message of resolve that we need to stand together, not only in words but also in deeds. So we agreed a strong statement calling on Russia to stop the attacks on Ukraine, to withdraw its forces, but also we agreed to continue to provide support to Ukraine and also continue to strengthen our presence in the eastern part of the alliance to prevent any attack on any NATO allied country. We have a defensive presence in the east. We are increasing our presence not to provoke a conflict but to prevent the conflict. And as long as there is no doubt about NATO's readiness to protect and defend all allies and our commitment to the core message, the core task of NATO, one for all for one, an attack on one ally will be regarded as an attack on all, then no ally will be attacked. And that will prevent the conflict. And that will preserve peace for NATO allies and for 1 billion people. And that's the reason why we communicate so clearly, and that's the reason why we are deploying more troops in the eastern part of the alliance, to make sure that there is no possibility to misunderstand our readiness to protect and defend all allies. And again, this is to preserve peace, to prevent an attack, and to prevent that the war which is going on in Ukraine spill over to any NATO allied country. And that was the message from NATO leaders today. That was also the message when I met with many of them in the G7 yesterday. And that is also, of course, a message when we speak to close partners, Finland, Sweden, and the European Union, because we all are concerned, and Russia's attack on Ukraine is more than an attack on Ukraine. It's a devastating, horrendous attack on innocent people in Ukraine, but it is also an attack on the whole European security order, and that's the reason why we take it so extremely seriously.
Deutsche Welle.
Thank you, Alexandra von Nahm, Deutsche Welle. Secretary General, one question on Ukraine's request for Turkey to close the Bosporus for Russian warships. Was that discussed today? And one follow-up on the question just asked. We heard today from the Lithuanian foreign minister saying that when we lose Ukraine today, we will be fighting for NATO later. Would you say that the statement is exaggerated? Thank you.
So on the Bosporus, that was not an issue. The potential attack or any potential attack on a NATO allied country, well, that has been my message throughout the whole day. That was the message from the NATO leaders in the summit today, is that we are there to protect and defend all allies. NATO is the strongest military alliance in the world. And make no mistake, we are there to protect and defend all allies and every inch of NATO territory. And we convey that message again and again, both in words but also in deeds. And that's the way to prevent war, that's the way to prevent an attack, to preserve peace, and we have done so for more than 70 years, and we will continue to do it, also in the light of the attack on Ukraine.
Thank you very much. This concludes this press conference.
Thank you so much.